So welcome to our Climate Impacts Workshop. We are looking at impacts of climate change on this community.
What we want to do as an outcome is to really inspire people who live there and work there to really understand what is climate change, what's within their control, outside their control, and who can they connect to. We have a sub-theme going on called Inside Outside. It's connecting people who live there with people outside of there and also beyond this country as well.
There are two things that I really want you to take away from what I'm talking about. The first one is the nature of the change that is happening around us, because it's not just climate change. Yes, the climate is changing, and what makes the climate change so significant is not the frequency and severity of extreme weather events. We've had extreme weather events for a long, long time. It's the fact that the pace of change is faster than ecosystems can adapt. But it is also coinciding with other changes in our world. And therein lies one of our major problems. If we cannot predict what is going to happen, it means that the models that we have based all our planning on historically are no longer valid. So either we choose to enhance the value of the community and therefore the infrastructure and housing stock, or we choose to let it waste away. A group of us were investigating communities and corporations who proved to be resilient in the face of disaster. And we found 5 common characteristics. The first one is that common focus. Now, this common focus means that people are interacting at a human level. The community must identify as a community, and that sense of identity is often informed and influenced by the infrastructure around, by the building stock, by the open space, the public realm, and so on. Well, if we want our community to be resilient, we need to separate the mechanics of resilience from human behavior. It is about the community coming together and identifying as a community to enable change. Through history, there are many examples of communities that have polarized on socioeconomic lines and effectively become exploitative. They all fail. They have all gone under. Whereas the ones that are genuinely inclusive have thrived and have adapted to change and have proved to be resilient. So what is that first step? That first step of community engagement is to create an association of partners.
The real difference between weather and climate is that weather is essentially what you pick out your daily outfit for, whereas climate is what you're buying your wardrobe for. And so all of your outfits that you have for the whole year, you're basing on where you're living and what your climate is, whereas on a single day, even if it's January, if it was 30 degrees on a January day, you would still pick out the shorts and t-shirt option instead. So the simplicity portion of this is really burning fossil fuels is leading to more CO2 in the atmosphere, increasing our greenhouse effect and our greenhouse gases, which is leading temperature to rise. In the right-hand side there, you actually see the temperature anomalies going all the way back to the late 19th century. And essentially what that looks like now, we have never seen temperature anomalies in human recorded time that have been as warm as this. If you were to stop greenhouse gas emissions now, that's not going to just flatline where our temperature is. It would continue to rise for a certain period of time because there's some residency and issues with greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. But if we continue to emit at the same rate, we're going to warm quite a bit on average. So that means winters and summers look very, very different. In general, the way to think about this is that 30 degrees C days in general in the past, we've averaged somewhere between 10 to 20 of those per year. 80 days a year, it represents essentially the entire summer worth of temperature over 30 degrees. Our current infrastructure is not designed for that type of temperature on a consistent basis. So you can think about things in terms of buildings, heating and cooling, windows, seals, all those sorts of things. Really, it has an impact there. But as you can see here, our simple problem was CO2 leading to temperature change. Well, that temperature change leads to some big problems. Things like rising seas, that's less of an issue for places like Toronto because of the fact that you're not on an ocean. But because of the other impacts, you're seeing more wild weather, more extremes, more wind events, more extreme thunderstorms, more extreme heat events. And so it's important to know that extreme events, even though you've never been hit by one, it's important to consider them in your climate impacts and consider them if you're considering the infrastructure that you have. And so similar to the forcing idea and how much extra force comes from an increase in wind speed, in this case, small increases in wind extremes are really having the potential to bring large increases in damages. And this 90 km/h number is really important because that's where kind of not necessarily the built infrastructure starts having problems, but everything around it starts having problems. So trees and tree branches, power and utilities, they start to have issues if it's not buried. And those sorts of issues come up right away. So it's a consideration for resiliency. And so how do we handle some of these things and how is it solvable? There's quite a few different ways. These are some possible solutions, having dynamic glass or better insulated buildings, better solutions for insulation. Electric heating and cooling is one example here. Having revised HVAC is another example here. But it's not unsolvable. There are sometimes simple solutions or retrofits that can be done to solve these problems.
And ultimately, the reason that these buildings exist and have been built is that they're to serve as, residence and homes for people. We don't just build buildings for fun, we build them for a purpose. And the purpose here is that people can have, a good quality of life. And we want to make sure that the buildings high-rise across Toronto is delivering on that. So I'll talk in a moment about kind of that cascading impacts when we consider climate change. Because ultimately we want to protect quality of life, ensure people stay safe, stay healthy in their homes. What we also want to consider, and what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen, is, as Norm spoke to, these shifts in our warming trajectories, in precipitation patterns. These can be stressors over the course of a year or many years and decades. Gradual warming, you might think, oh, well, we've plenty of time to adapt to that. In some sense we do, but in terms of how we might have built, our buildings and our communities today, we factored in certain assumptions. So what you're seeing here on the screen would be your mechanical cooling unit for a building. So your HVAC system performance. Based on when you put that unit into your building, it might have been assumed that that's going to have a lifespan of 20, 25 years based on the operating conditions of today. But if it's now dealing with a gradually warming climate, which can include extreme events, you're going to be servicing that unit more often. It's going to be running at a higher load so that it can meet its cooling capacity in hot weather events. And all of those things will result in, the degradation of those units, and therefore likelihood that they'll fail earlier than intended. So you might only get a, 17-year lifespan out of what should have been a 25-year unit. We want to understand how things are felt at the community level so that we can understand how we can better intervene at the design stage or through retrofits and renovations on site, so that we can capture this full breadth of cascading impacts.
In terms of making change, we have to really tap into that ethos, tap into people there and help enable them to have a voice, in a voice that's inclusive and not disruptive and rebellious.
I think in order to be truly successful, we need to have the people who live in those communities to be vocal and be empowered to be able to act. And we need to give them that space to act.
And I think it's going to be the people who are least advantaged, exacerbated by COVID, who are going to experience this and will have to self-organize and protest to get the changes made, which I think are not going to come readily from the investors or owners. I think they're going to have to be policy changes.
Things like heat waves, really affects people because they have no ability to afford the ACs. They feel they don't have any voice to talk about it because they don't know how the system works here in Canada. Many of the people just arrived here and have no idea how the law works, if they can actually talk about something, or they would be oppressed like in their country of origin, or just a really hard situation.
A role and purpose of this project is to understand impact so that we can translate this to what needs to be done at the building level, because but different people are responsible for different parts of this challenge. Not everything should be left to the community to fend for themselves.
First, I want to say thank you very much, everyone, for sharing your wisdom, your insights. It's so valuable.
Thanks again, everyone. Appreciate taking time from your afternoons and evenings for this.